Szczepańska will be chairing this meeting. Please be advised that the meeting will be live streamed. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Apologies. We've got Katie Wilson and Councillor Cox and Henry online. Anything? Okay. Declarations of interest and declarations. Thank you. Minutes of last meeting, are they agreed? Councillor?
Just one point. There's a very thorough note of the discussion we had about complaints against members, which is fine. But I think we also had a discussion as part of that about confidentiality, about complaints against members. And I think it might be useful just to have a sentence on that, if the Secretary could have a look at the recording and possibly add something. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Agenda item 4, review of polling places. Andrew Robertson, is there anything you would like to add to the reports, or shall we go straight to the question?
We can go straight to the questions, Chair,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Thank you. Any questions? No. I will take the report as noted. Thank you. Okay.
Put your mic on, please.
The blind and that. Do we do anything on for the blind?
Yes, we do have some measures for people that are blind and partially sighted. So if they have a postal vote, then they can have what's called a waiver, where they don't have to provide their signature, and they only have to provide their date of birth. And if they go to the polling station, what we have is a device called the tactile voting device. And what happens is it's placed over the ballot paper, and the presiding officer will read out the candidates' names, and then say that's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they can feel over the numbers and then know where to mark their cross in the relevant box. We're also looking to get the information for all the blind and partially sighted people in Merton for Merton Vision, and we're going to write to them and just let them know that these measures are in place, and if they need any assistance. And I'm also thinking of putting something on the household notification letter, which is going to go out in January, where we're going to mention if anybody with any disabilities or blind, partially sighted, etc., if they need any assistance, then to contact our office.
Thanks very much.
No worries.
Councillor Lundy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the papers. It's quite good to review. I think for me, it's just some of the operationalisation of this, and the sense of, given the large sort of footprint of the schools during polling days, how are we marrying up any wraparound offers or things for kids to do with their parents during those times, because obviously they're not going to school during that day.
Well, with regards to schools, we have done quite a lot of work over the years with reducing the amount of schools we use, and we use 6 at the moment, but 3 of those stay open because we managed to use an outbuilding or a nursery, etc. So we closed 3, which are really just unavoidable. With regards to kind of an offer for parents and children, that wouldn't really be our remit as electoral services. So I can't really answer that question, to be honest.
Can I come back on that, Chair? Briefly?
Yeah, briefly.
It was just talking to the right department that can, then. Is that possible?
Yep, I can make some inquiries as to what department that would be, and then pose the question. Yep.
Thank you all. I will take this as noted. Item 5, final accounts. Roger, verbal update. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief update from me, a verbal update from me on the progress of our audit of our accounts before we bring in our partner, Kevin Souter from EY, to address item 6 on your agenda. So really, progress is well advanced in finalising the audit of our accounts. Obviously, a lot of work going on, which Kevin will sort of outline in his report. Just to confirm, our draft accounts were published on the 25th of June in good time for that deadline of the 30th of June. Still publicly available for members' interest. We then put them open for public inspection for that 30 working days. Just to report to the committee, we didn't have any queries on those draft accounts when we published them, so that opportunity is now closed. The final audit report and the opinion will come to the February committee. That's in your diaries, and that will be in good time for us, for you to be able to scrutinise the accounts, ask questions on them, and hear from the final opinion and report from our external auditor in good time for the due deadline at the end of February. So we're well on track, Chair. That's really all I have to say as the verbal update.
Thank you. Any questions on that?
Hi, for those who don't know me, I'm the independent member. Do the accounts come to this committee as well?
Yes, that you will have an opportunity to see the full set of accounts. The draft accounts are online, so you can view them and ask questions about them anytime as your right as a committee member, and we will answer those queries sort of offline, but they will come to the February committee along with the final audit opinion, as you expect.
Thank you. Any more questions? Now let's move swiftly to item 6 and make the update as noted. Thank you. External audit, Kevin, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Good evening, members. So the report in front of you is a progress update to outline where we've got to with the audit of the Council's accounts that we've just been referring to. It starts on page 45 of your agenda pack. We've provided the report, which is broadly in the same format as we're going to provide the final results report to the next meeting, just so you've got some familiarity with the structure, and you can see, hopefully see in February the progress we've made to get to that final position. But I do appreciate it's a lot of pages, so I'll just put out the key highlights for you at this point in time. So the audit is ongoing. We have identified a few adjustments to the draft set of accounts, but we, as part of the audit, haven't identified anything material. On page 52, you will see that management themselves have identified a material adjustment in respect of Stanford Primary School. So I think it's important just to draw out that is something that management have identified. We've had a look at. We've asked a few questions just to make sure there's nothing similar, but we don't think there's anything else of that nature. On page 55, we have highlighted a few judgments about the quality of the accounts and some evidence, and we have pulled out here that we are having some issues with the quality of evidence being provided. What we're trying to do and communicate here is the fact that we need good quality evidence to undertake a good, efficient audit. And in the next couple of years, we've got to bring the deadlines forward. So it's a really major focus to try and draw out those judgments, and where necessary, we can work on an action plan. And that's what we're doing. The finance team have been really helpful in trying to provide good quality evidence that we're asking for. The issue is more generally once we get outside of finance, and we've got to talk to the wider members of officers who are much less familiar with the audit process. That's where we're running into more of those issues. So we're going to be working on that for next year to try and see how we can get better quality, right first time evidence to help the efficiency for us, for the finance team, and for everybody involved. But overall, as mentioned in the previous agenda item, yeah, we are on track to bring that report, the final report, to you in February, and to meet the backstop date as at the end of February 2026. So I just want to direct you to Appendix A of the report, which is on page 75 of the pack. So members will be aware that we have disclaimed the audit of the council back in 22-23, and that's been discussed at previous committee meetings. What we're trying to do within our reports this year is highlight where authorities are in terms of the journey to rebuild the assurances and get back to clean opinions. So we've brought in the anticipated timeline, which comes from the National Audit Office's published guidance. And the key message in respect of Merton Council is that you are on track with that timeline. We have no concerns over that, so we're rebuilding those assurances, and that is not a position that's shared, across the country. So I think it's a good news message for this council, despite the fact that I know members, aren't particularly happy the fact we did have to disclaim the accounts a couple of years ago in the first place. Turning to our responsibilities around value for money, we've got a very brief page on 64, page 64 of the pack, which says we haven't identified any risks in terms of your arrangements of value for money. So in our view, you have the right arrangements to ensure that you're using your resources well on behalf of the public. In the context of this report, we only report sort of negatively in terms of value for money. So the fact we've got very little to say in terms of that should be taken as a positive. Just one further thing before I end my presentation. I've been asked just to mention just a short bit about the pension fund accounts, because they do form part of the accounts as a whole. We have reported to the pension committee. Again, we are well on track with that audit. We're nearly finished. Just a couple of tweaks in terms of disclosures around investments to be finalised, but both audits are on track to be completed in February. We have to sign them off together. So no issues that I should bring to your attention around the pension fund audit. So that's the key issues I wanted to highlight. Very happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you. I will start with a question. I understand that Merton's audit was adversely impacted for reasons beyond our control. So when can Merton expect to receive a clean, unqualified audit opinion on our accounts? And my second question is, why there was delay on the council side in responding to some of the audit queries?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so if I can refer you again to Appendix A, which is our summary of the rebuild strategy and when you might get to a clean opinion. So now, with the caveat, obviously, we have to do audits in the future. We will hope that they go well. We anticipate that you will be back to a clean, unqualified opinion in the financial year 26-27.
Chair, I just a follow-on point from there, and then I'll cover the second question. It's worth noting, I'm sure members or many members will remember this, that the reason for the disclaimer in 23-24 was not anything that Merton Council did or the officers did. It was the ability of the auditor to complete that work, and it's a discussion we've had many times at this committee. But it's important to recognise the fact that at no time was it anything that the officers or the council did in terms of incomplete records or whatever. But it does demonstrate the challenges we've had since then in terms of the knock-on effects of comparable stats, etc., which has led to the disclaiming of our accounts and unqualified, the qualified nature of our accounts. And I personally can't wait to get back to a position where we can have an unqualified audit opinion. But you must take on board what the auditor has said, both this year and in previous years, in terms of not finding anything material for the committee to worry about or concern themselves about. But we'll be able to go into that in a lot more detail in your February committee. Turning to the red rag, if you like, we've had with regards to responding to queries. I think it requires a little bit of context. During the course of the audit, we had some 358 sets of audit queries, and a lot of those had subheadings to them and a lot of sampling data, etc. So it was a particularly difficult time to be able to respond to those queries. Some of them, the deadline was the next day and that kind of thing. So it's not surprising that we've had some challenges there. But two things I would point out that Kevin has mentioned. Nothing material has been found, but also a lot of the problems arose from not the accountants returning information, but when they moved outside. And that's a message I'm clearly going to take for future reference, and we need to, whereas make sure our accountants are ready with their clean working papers, solid working papers, and their response times are rapid in that regard. It's obviously a message we need to get out more towards the external bodies and other departments who also have to respond to some of the queries. And finally, just to record the fact that as of now, we've only got 5 outstanding requests that we are currently dealing with, which we should be responding to soon. So we're well on the way to achieving what I hope to be, albeit the fact that it'll have to be issued as a qualified audit opinion. I mean, the way to, in my view, having a clean audit view from that and a good a positive value for money assessment. So just some context there.
Thank you. Another question, Alexa?
I suppose I'll say a bit of my background so you can see the angle that I'm coming from. I'm also a former external auditor myself. SIPA qualified as, and I used to work at Grant Thornton. So I'm totally sympathetic to all of the things that you've said, and I'm sort of not at all coming from the place where which I think I'm not coming from a place of sort of questioning any of the capacity of the finance team to manage queries and everything. You know, you all do a stellar job just managing the audit alongside day to day. But I suppose my question is more about, because I haven't worked in audit for a few years now, so I'm not necessarily sure where the sector's landed on how we're dealing with the disclaimers versus qualifications. So obviously the disclaimer of opinion was because of the reporting, because of the deadline, and that's completely understandable. And now that's kind of had the knock-on impact of lack of assurance on the opening balances. The fact that you're contemplating qualifying next, the 24/5, rather than disclaiming, I guess the question is, qualification to me sounds like it could reflect maybe a bit negatively on Merton rather than a disclaimer, because at least sector-wide, we all know that organisations that have disclaimers against them was because of the audit backlog, and everyone knows that. But is the move now that everyone's moving to, okay, yeah, now qualified opinions are the ones that are within the mix? Because you could have the councils that genuinely deserve a qualified opinion mixed in with the councils that have qualified opinions so then we can't tell who actually is through the fault of their own or not, if you see what I mean.
That's exactly the question I raised earlier with our auditors. So we're very much on the same page. I'm going to allow Kevin to answer that one, actually.
Yeah, and it is a good point, because you know, I think everybody's quite clear you want an unqualified opinion, but then the distinctions of what other versions there are and how bad or good they are it's not necessarily something that everybody's familiar with. But if I try to keep it as simple as I can, you've got disclaimed at this end, you've then got adverse, you've then got qualified, and then you've got unqualified. So moving to qualified is the way you want to go. Now, but I do appreciate that, you know, it doesn't resonate well. So what we are trying to do to address the point about comparability, that's why we're trying to draw out more judgments in our reporting and sort of RAG rating things. So we can really be clear in saying, you know, these are the authorities which have a major problem. You can't support your accounts, you're not doing it properly, you're not rebuilding, we're behind the timeline. As opposed to yourselves in the position you are in, yeah, we've had a few delays, but you are supporting your audit, you're producing a good set of accounts on time, and so therefore we are trying to get that rebuild. It's nuanced, it's difficult to try and communicate that to the layman. It's probably difficult for us to really understand it as professionals and try and do a point of comparability between audits. But what I can do to assure you as a committee is we are on the right track. We are getting the reports through, the information through from your team. You are producing as a council your accounts on time. And so you are moving positively in that right direction. I hope that goes some way to answering the question.
That's good to know. And I just, the follow-up question on that is this, so amongst EY, you obviously have a massive amount of clients in local government. Is this sort of an EY-wide approach where we're sort of saying those organisations that have demonstrated a move toward at least establishing some level of grip on those opening balances, we're going to sort of like step them up to qualified, and then is that happening across the board? Like, how are you assuring consistency within your organisation between different engagement leads? And
Yep, so we definitely have a framework to make sure we have consistency. We all have to abide by the ISAs. We all have to follow the rules in terms of what audit reports you can get. So that is our ultimate framework for consistency of thought process to get you there. What we're not going to get is consistency of outcome, because those authorities that are not supporting their audit, they do not get to move positively forward on that trajectory. So consistency is definitely there. If I can try and put a context to this, we think of all of our authorities where we are going to have to modify our opinion. We think it's probably somewhere around 20 that might get to qualified this year from disclaimed. So you are in the vanguard of our authorities that are moving forward and rebuilding that assurance.
Sorry, could I just make a comment? I think you're absolutely right. Part of my frustration here is the common parlance is you're either qualified or you're unqualified. I think disclaimed is almost a newish term that people can't get their heads around, whereas they can. You're either qualified as an opinion or an unqualified opinion, and I think that's where my frustration lies. I understand your explanation, Kevin, but I think in the public's mind, the fact that we have been qualified, it has all sorts of connotations, and in the great list that gets published at some stage or other about those councils that have been qualified and those are unqualified, I'm afraid through no fault of our own, we are going to be on the qualified list, and albeit that we all understand why, in the fullness of time, looking back, I'm afraid it'll just look like a black mark against us, and that's not really the case. So that's just part of my frustration. I've said it many times before, but we are where we are.
Okay.
Where the very first time when we put the disclaimer, we added additional detail to show that there's nothing wrong with the Merton Council account. It's because of the national audit backlog. That's the reason it's different. So if we can probably, if it is that's the path we need to follow, qualified then come to unqualified, we probably need a bit more narrative added to that before we publish, and so the Merton public will understand there's nothing wrong with the accounts. They were prepared accordingly and published on time and met the time, but this is the path we need to follow. And probably, as you correctly pointed, after some time when we look, we don't know the background, somebody looking, they will say yes, why it is qualified. So I think if we can add more detail or narrative, we might be able to.
I do think even knowing that we're one of 20 moving toward qualified does give that level of assurance to the public that we're working in a positive direction. I do think just generally there's probably going to be a bit of a black mark against these COVID-y years because of the backlog. So it's something every local authority is going to deal with. So hopefully it doesn't reflect too badly on us in particular.
Thank you, Councillor Oliver, and then final question, Councillor Wilson. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question based on, firstly, the delay, and secondly, the number that Roger mentioned, which was 358 queries. And I just wanted to ask if the audit this year was particularly thorough, and is this an unusual amount of questions that you're asking which has led to some sort of delay, or in previous years has the same level of workload been applied and it's just worked better?
In general, it is the same workload. We haven't had a major change in your risk profile, which means we have to ask more questions. But you have a lot of transactions. You know, you spend millions of pounds, and we've got to look at those carefully. The one area where it has caused additional work this year is because you've had new standards of accounting in terms of leasing. So in that area, yes, we've had to ask a few more questions than previously. That should be a one-off because that's a new introduction. And then next year it won't be new anymore. We'll have established the baseline. But in a broad response to your query, it is the same, pretty much the same level year on year. Because we've had those delays in previous years, it's about sort of getting the rhythm back of auditing, getting the familiarity with people of doing the work on time to a deadline, and that's what we're going to be working on next year with your finance team, of how we can take the issues forward, improve them where they need improving, and keeping the good quality where it has been good. So we are trying to work together on these issues. We're not ignoring them, but we're trying to take them forward positively.
Thank you. That's been really helpful and really detailed response. Can I just ask about value for money? And I feel like we have touched on this in previous meetings, but I always just find it helpful just to remind myself what you actually assess. Is it sort of the very top level arrangements as sort of there, and you wouldn't necessarily deep dive to see if those arrangements are being applied?
Yeah, that's it exactly. We start with a risk assessment against the criteria that's set by the National Audit Office. And it is high level about the corporate arrangements. So if we identify risks, so there are instances which indicate there could be a problem, we will then take more of a deep dive into that area to be able to make a judgment, is there a problem or is there not? We didn't identify any risks from our risk assessment, so we haven't needed to do that this year. So we are satisfied that there are good arrangements in place for the council at that corporate level. If you've got good arrangements in place, the assumption therefore is if you follow those arrangements, you should produce value for money. It's a very subjective aspect, is something good value for money or not? So that's why we have to concentrate on the arrangements and the processes.
Thank you. The missing school, the £14 million, which I think you said was found by officers, which sounds great, which is encouraging. Has that always been missing, or has it sort of dropped out at some point?
The school building used to be the school used to be an academy. Then this closed. They have become a mainstream school. This property was returned back to council. So in the past years, it wasn't a Merton property. It belongs to the academy. So, and when it is gone to academy, it's valued 0. And so this time, when we send the list for valuation in April, we missed this asset, considering this was a academy. So that's the reason we missed it.
Thank you. And the final question, Councillor Mundy.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I kind of just more focus on practical matters rather than some of the level of the detail there. Although it was an interesting conversation to hear. So one of the reflections you outlined was sort of your onboarding process and the engagement side of things, and sort of that level of feedback. Is that sort of culture, or is that your kind of deployment within the organisation? Sort of say, hey, it's audit time, and how you kind of ramp people up to say this is what you need. What are you kind of, which is organisation, which is versus EY coming in and just explaining very clearly what you need?
Yeah, so what we try and do, we try and offer seminars in terms of what we need as audit evidence. We try and be as specific as we can when we're setting out these requirements to say, you know, can we have, for example, an invoice? Can we see the bank statement where it was actually paid or received, depending which way it goes? And then if it's something that has to be calculated internally by the council, we say, well, can we see your calculation? Can we see, you know, the spreadsheet behind it, that sort of thing. So we try and be as specific as we can. But ultimately, we can't really get to everybody within the organisation who would be ultimately involved. So we have to try and concentrate on working with the finance team to try and disseminate that information. We as auditors, we need to have that plan. So, you know, when are we coming in? So the finance team can be geared up themselves to know when we're going to, you know, come in and put that pressure on them. Let's be honest, audit is a pressure. And then the finance team can, you know, we try and be as detailed as we can in what we're doing through the audit process, so that they can then communicate out to the rest of the council, you know, what are we likely to need? When are those things coming in? Problem you have in some ways, which can't be avoided, is, you know, we have to do the audit through the summer. Schools, for example, they have their summer holidays, so, you know, things just there aren't people around, so you have a few delays you just have to wait for. So some stuff can't be avoided. So from our perspective, that's what we're trying to do. I don't know if the final bit of perspective of what they do as well.
Yes, just very briefly, we have early meetings with the external auditors in terms of the modus operandi. I make sure that we always review, we have a closure review, what went well, what didn't go so well, and that reflects both on what we did well and not so well, and what we felt the external auditors could have helped us with or didn't do so well. We have a very honest and forthright, and we try and bring that learning through to the following year. And we always, you know, we exchange clear timetables of when people are going on holiday, so they know who to send queries to. And we always encourage some of the wicked issues that we have, and in the past it's been asset valuations and stuff like that. We always try and get that done early on in the process. We try all these things, but inevitably new stuff comes along, or we have queries, or the non-availability of either one of our members of staff or one of our departments, or the auditors, in terms of that availability. So we do do a lot of pre-prep and emphasize the importance of good solid working papers, etc. But every year there's something that comes along and delays us or causes problems. But on the whole, I think on balance, we have a pretty good effort. We've never had any real problems in terms of producing our draft accounts on time or the final accounts on time, and the working papers are generally okay. And I do take to heart Kevin's comment about where a lot of the problems lay with regards to getting information. I can control my own accountants fairly directly. Sometimes it's a bit harder to get other departments to take it, what is a fairly invasive process they'll see as seriously as I'd like them to do, but I will always strive to do better on that.
Thank you. I can see Councillor Cox hand up online.
Hi.
The last question, Councillor Cox.
Great. I just wanted to ask about the management information that's feeding into the draft accounts. I've done some work with for some of the NHS trusts, for example. And the reality is some of the MI or management information, actually people don't really understand it, and they kind of think that all government money is the same pot, and so there isn't the same, like in the private sector you get a lot more a drive to be really understand the efficiencies and where the gaps are in public spending, like where you're overspending. But it's actually, there's sometimes a problem at a lower level, and people just work with the same management information templates for years and years and years, quite often in the public sector, and actually they're not really providing the right level of detail, and the staff involved don't probably have the same attitude. I'm not saying always, but don't seem to have the same attitude that someone might do if they're running a private company. So I just wanted to ask you about that and say, look, how much faith and how much trust do you have in your own management procedures, and management information procedures, and have you amended those since that qualification?
I'll try and cover some of that. I mean, we always strive to improve the management information we have, and hence the rather elaborate answer I gave to the last question around the pre-preparation work that we do. There's but a lot of it should be fairly well known and fairly repetitive. So we should have the information in the form that it's required by our auditors from that point of view. So it's always a challenge, but I think where we do get real challenges and delays going forward is where some of that information requirement changes, or there's nuances to it. I mean, Kevin outlined, the new requirements around leasing information, etc. So we have to adapt to that requirement. But I don't think we have too much trouble in terms of getting that information together. I think it's really the focus of the individual departments when they're asked for that information, in terms of, I guess, other work that they have to do and the other demands on their time at the time. But it's something I'm going to take away and always constantly try and improve on from that point of view.
We have the guidance and the template or sample accounts from the CIFA, Chartered Institute of Public Finance Accounting. So we have to follow line by line what information we need to disclose, the format and everything. And that's where the auditor starts. And we haven't followed the structure and the required amount of disclosure that we'll be asked to put in. So we try to meet all those requirements. That means the account is in a good standard. So that's what we produce. So we don't try to put anything additional or less, Councillor. We have to go with it.
Thank you all. The committee has noted the content of the report, and we will move on to item 7. Internal Audit Progress Report. Margaret, would you like to add anything, or are you happy to move on straight to the questions? Okay, any questions?
Chair, I just wanted to ask you if you thought that we've got roughly 1/3 limited assurance and 2/3 reasonable assurance. Seems like that's not a very good ratio. I would expect limited assurance to be pretty infrequent. What do you think?
The limited assurances so far this year are higher than normal, but I can't really conclude the year until I've finished the work. So it may be that we have focused on the higher risk audits to make sure that they're done. So I'd have to form an opinion at the year end on whether the limited assurances are higher overall. But yes, I agree they are higher at the moment.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Wilson.
Can I ask about the transitions from children to adults plans? So it's, you said that they should be reintroduced as soon as possible. Just wanted to understand when they will stop being used. Just a bit more context around that would be really helpful, because I assume this is some of our most vulnerable children, those in care as well. Just wanted to find out a bit more about what's happened there.
Okay, thank you. The council have been using the EHCP plans and support plans as part of their transition arrangements. So when we came in to do the review and we looked at a sample of those, it wasn't very clear on the EHCP what the transition plans were. So it's not required that they need to have plans in place, but we have said that they should, so that it will make it easier for the process, and that's something they've agreed to give. That does need to be brought back in as a priority. So as to how long they've been doing that, I need to check and get back to you.
Thank you all. The committee has no report. We'll move on.
You can go back.
Just wanted to ask about one in particular, which was there's a comment in the one which is about high needs block, and it says recovery efforts have lapsed for years, making the total recoverable amount and potential long-term losses uncertain. That doesn't sound very good.
I don't know if I can add much to what I've already put there. I don't know if Roger wants to say anything about the balance that's outstanding. At the time, it was a concern that the finance team had raised with us, that the outer borough children come from other councils, they weren't doing the recharges. I think that someone's been brought in to help to work through that backlog. I don't know if Roger's got a more up-to-date position on it.
No more than that, but it's something we are addressing, councillor, on this. It is a concern that we get the money in at the appropriate time, and where we need to dedicate extra and additional resources to that, we will, and taking those recommendations on board. I don't have anything more specific to say to update on that, but it is something we are addressing.
I just had a follow-up question from the question about transition from children to adults. So is it you picked a sample and found that there were people who were set to transition from children's to adult services, and those children had EHCPs, but it wasn't indicated on their EHCP what the transition plan was? So that was the weakness that was identified, was it?
It wasn't clear what there was reference to it, but it wasn't clear what the full transition plans were. It wasn't clear on because it's in part of their annual EHCP. It wasn't, and it had other actions in there. So it's not like wasn't clearly separated.
Sure. And an additional issue was that not everyone who was set to transition had an EHCP. Is that what you were also saying?
I didn't. No, I didn't say that. But I mean, they're either got EHCPs or support plans in place. So it's one or the other. But yeah.
Councillor Wilson.
The client financial affairs, what does that relate to? Sorry, I just was unsure what that was all about, really.
The client financial affairs is where we, while the council look after, so the deputyships look after people's money that can't look after it for themselves, or they may not have family. So the council become the power of attorney. That's it.
Okay, thank you all. Item 8, fraud update. Kevin, over to you. Would you like to add anything or straight to the questions?
Sorry, I'm happy to go straight to questions.
Okay. Any questions to Kevin? No, the committee will take the content of the report as noted. Okay, so Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Oliver.
Tenancy fraud abuse, Kevin. There's sort of pre-25-26. I couldn't see any figures for that, and I wasn't sure why that was.
So with the with the rise in spend on tenancy fraud, it's become a new focused area for us to look in. So that's why there are no previous figures. And it's also an area that, again, very briefly, I think in alludes to the increasing costs, the significant jumping costs in temporary accommodation. There are additional resources that I've had this year just to help with working jointly with the Merton's housing temporary accommodation team to do some of the validation work. But that's why you haven't seen.
Thank you again, Chair. My question is about the table 6.2, I think it is the one where it says, looks at temporary accommodation, correct usage of temporary accommodation. It says 25 verification visits and 5 found to be false or unnecessary. Have I understood that correctly? My concern is that that suggests, although it's a small sample, 20% of temporary accommodation placements are incorrect.
What we've got there is a mixture between I'd identified temporary accommodation as an area that we needed to do some work on this year in terms of the fraud team, and then just into the start of the year after I'd set my plan, I then got approval for additional resources. So there is a mixture there in terms of the two targets, in terms of the expectation, which was initially to do just some of the validation visits, to now some additional work on top of that, where we are being able to identify potential misuse, which is also why you see the numbers out of kilter in terms of the final column, in terms of the number of visits actually undertaken. So that's mine. I need to update that going forward, and that's part I'm working on, reporting through to the shared service board on what a new appropriate performance measure will be.
Okay. Could I just ask a quick follow-up? I just wanted what your opinion on the work you've done so far. I mean, this is temporary accommodation is one of our problem areas financially, and is it your impression so far from the work you've done that we have a problem there in terms of not managing it correctly?
Well, it's a new problem that all authorities have, and it's a problem that all authorities are responding to. So it's not for me. I did that for internal audit colleagues and their review to assess the performance of that team. But what we have is some extra resources gone in there to work alongside the temporary accommodation team. The resources that I have are new to work young apprentices. So the first year of that is we were focusing on very much direct support for the housing team in terms of the verification checks, which are largely aimed at the individuals who are placed there. But going forward, the fraud concerns, I think, are more towards perhaps the misuse from the provider side. So an example has been, and we have seen this, where the a council believes they're procuring a self-contained flat for a vulnerable individual, hence the need for self-contained, and then we go out and find out that they are actually a room in shared accommodation, which is obviously the prices that might be charged for self-contained flat are a lot more than what's being charged for a single placement. So with the visits, the prime aim has been verification that the correct person placed in the property is there. But what we're also finding about is anomalies over the condition or style of property. We've also had, I think, 2 or 3 safeguarding referrals already from the visit work.
Very much. That sounds like useful work.
Yeah, it was just to follow up on that point actually, because I understand the housing team don't have a huge amount of capacity, obviously, to go and do visits on kind of quality checks and things, and trying to build that team. So you are saying, Kevin, that when your team go in, you can say actually the quality of accommodation is quite poor as well, and you can comment and feedback on that.
So where we see problems with the quality accommodation, we will comment on that. The visit work we're doing isn't just for Merton, we've got it across the 5-borough partnership, so we've got other comparators, but all authorities are using the similar accommodation throughout London, and that's where the visits, it's not just London, there's some of the home counties where people are placed, so it's time-consuming task, but we've started that, as I say, very much for Merton. They didn't have that capability. The initiative funding has come my way to support and to work, when they're here, they're working virtually daily or weekly with the temporary accommodation team.
Thank you. I will take the, Councillor briefly.
Just like to ask a question about the relationship between the targets and the actual, because in temporary accommodation it says the target was 25 and the actual was 244, which seems a big difference. And also the housing fraud, there was 20 is the target and 6 were done. So just want to know the relationship and how the targets are arrived at.
So for the temporary accommodation, that target was set. So I had within the core funding resources for the fraud partnership, I had identified that we needed to do work on temporary accommodation, and there's a certain amount of resource. The target of 25 was based around that resource. The outcome is that when we talked about the need for work on temporary accommodation and highlighted the problem, I then got additional resource. So because of that additional resource, that's why we've been able to do more, and that's where I apologise that those 2 numbers are out of kilter. So there is work that has been done that I reported back to the Shared Service Board where the targets are changing, and also this is the first year that we are tackling work on temporary accommodation, and it's through feedback of the Shared Service Board where I will be challenged as to what the initial targets. We haven't done anything like this before, so it was very much a best guess target. The feedback across all the partners where we find out whether that works. In terms of the housing applications, we have relied heavily in the past in terms of using. We don't get any real referrals or concerns on that. We do have some. We get many. In the past, we've relied upon the data matching that's done through the NFI initiative. That's a 2-year process, and there are some interim updates. That's why we say we have some extra ones going in. We're expecting some more matched output coming in January, and I apologise there, typo, because that's a January 26. We're expecting that, so that's where the work will be done. See whether we will come back to the applications that we can do some work on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you all. I will take this as noted. Item 9, key strategic risk register. Zoe, over to you. Would you like to add anything?
Chair, could I just add something in context for the risk report? It's really just to flag up some future work that will be coming to this committee. We've recently worked heavily with Zurich to review and refocus our approach to risk management. So future reports that you will get on this will reflect on that work, and we will sort of radically overhaul our approach to risk management with regard, and some clarity over things like risks and issues, etc. So in future you'll see the product of that work, but what you're seeing here for the last time is the sort of the traditional work we've been doing. And I'll hand over briefly to Zoe just to outline a few things, but maybe you can just take questions.
Any questions? Councillor Oliver.
So I'll just say that again. I'm looking at the housing supply, affordable housing. A couple of things that struck me as weird about it. It said score without mitigation 12, current score 20. So it seems that our mitigation has made things worse. Can you comment on that?
Actually, that isn't the case. We've removed that from our latest reporting. What the report is actually picking up is the original score when the risk was first loaded onto the register, rather than the mitigated score.
Just one more small point on this, and that is there don't seem to be any mitigating actions listed on that housing one.
It's fair to say that as part of us reviewing, we've actually split that risk into two: housing supply and home. And we have now controls in place and mitigating actions.
I've just got a couple of questions. The housing, the council housing building programme, would that appear in a like a departmental risk register? Because obviously we're spending a lot of money on that, and there must presumably be risks in spending lots of money on new builds. So where would that be? And the second question is on the equalities duties section. Now, obviously, it's a very controversial topic, very much up in the air, but the Supreme Court decision on the definition of sex, is that something that which clearly must raise some risks in general, is that something that would be considered as part of the overall review of our equalities work?
In answer to the first question, which I've forgotten, sorry.
Bills that we're building.
I do apologise. I would expect the risks to do with that particular activity to be considered at two levels. So on the departmental register, and also as part of our processes and procedures, any project that's undertaken should have a risk register attached to it, and that risk register should be reviewed at each meeting. In answer to the second question, I will make sure that we do give that consideration. I will flag that as part of the review that we're doing now.
On the risk of cyber attacks, do we do any sort of like mock phishing internally to sort of catch employees out, which I know happens in the private sector and is a bit unpleasant, but it is quite an effective way of making people aware?
Yes, we do. Yeah,
yes,
we do.
Okay. Can I ask another question? Is that okay? Just on the school's budget deficit, I remember, Margaret, you've spoken to us about the audits that you do in schools, and I just wanted to understand how they work alongside the sort of tabletop exercises. So I guess it's just how regularly are all the schools being monitored now? Because I think before you said it was around every 8 years approximately for you to see a school. Just to understand what that level of monitoring is and how regular it is.
From an audit point of view, we try and do 8 a year. So in the report, in my report, I had 6 listed as ones we review. but finance as well provides support to schools. So there's an SLO in place with schools, and there's 2 officers that go out and provide support to schools on that. Yeah, Podge will probably answer that part.
Yeah, it's 2 ways. I mean, obviously, Margaret does her audit work, but we are constantly in contact with our schools, providing financial support to them, and we have dedicated officers to do that, as Margaret's alluded to. That's a constant.
Has that become more frequent, Roger?
Because more frequent, and depends on where we think the school is. So we do a risk assessment of each school that we provide financial services and financial support to. So obviously, the higher risk schools, as we decree them, they get a bit more attention.
Thank you. Any more questions? No. The committee was asked to review the adequacy of the risk management framework and associated control environment, and consider the key strategic risk and issues faced by the council, and determine wherever those are being actively managed. Review key strategic risk register as of Q1 25-26, and I will take that as noted and agreed. Thank you. Item 10, member induction plan. Amy, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I think it's fairly self-explanatory. This is brought in response to a request from committee members at the last meeting that we bring a report on this. I think the only thing to add that isn't in the report is that we will be providing some training on member safety, particularly around canvassing in the run-up to the elections. So that will also be provided. Otherwise, happy to move to questions, Chair.
Any questions on that? Councillor Hayes?
Members induction now, yeah? Just want to double check. On the induction, it talks about, and I think I've raised this with Amy prior in correspondence, we get keeping people safe. But one thing we never seem to do is at any meeting, and particularly the main council meeting, who the health and safety officers are. I think it was Amy that told me the security staff are the first aiders. So I just think maybe we should, if we could highlight that particular fact, that doorkeep security personnel, is that the correct term, as health and safety are trained. Because when there's, hopefully never, but whenever there's a crisis, there's a certain period where people scramble and not quite sure what to do. And sometimes somebody says, oh, I'm a first aider and stuff like that. So I just think maybe we should highlight that to all councillors and all staff. So particularly the security personnel are first aid trained. I'd be interested to know how often they're reviewed in any event. But I think that's something we need to make councillors aware of, particularly new councillors. Thank you.
Councillor Chair, we can certainly note that and do it that way. I was just saying thank you for bringing that up, Councillor. Yes, we have corresponded on this, but yes, we can certainly note that and make councillors aware of that fact. And as I say, they are obviously both within the meeting and immediately outside the meeting in terms of where they're located as well. So we can contact them.
Holly, and then yes.
Thank you very much, Chair. At the time when Amy was preparing the report for this meeting, I've also been having conversations with the various group leaders about this issue. And, one thing I wanted to stress is that, this is a really good set of proposals, but it's by no means exhaustive. So if there is anything that members would like to identify they feel would be useful, not just for newly elected members, but for re-elected members as well, then we'd be very happy to hear it. And we've one thing that I've talked to the group leaders about is, I'd be really interested to hear anything their candidates might say, people who've not been councillors before, but what they would like to know, what they would like to form part of the induction. You'll notice that in this paper, some of the things we are making them mandatory. Getting councillors to attend training is really difficult, and that's not just a Merton thing, that's the same as every council I've ever worked in. Members are really short of time, they've got lots going on, they've got jobs, they've got families. Some things it's really important to mandate, like safeguarding training. If you're out canvassing and you go to a house and you maybe see a child and you're worried about them, members need to know
what to do under those circumstances. So some of the things we have to mandate, but there's a whole range of, you know, we don't want to make it too onerous on members, but I would be, and any feedback either from you, from your groups, from your candidates and so on, what do you think people need to really make the most of the experience of being a councillor and give them what they need to do the job? And please let us know.
Thank you, Alexa.
It's a bit of a question for officers, but also maybe a bit of a question for you, Chair. But I wonder just the level of training new members get even to come onto the audit committee, just what exactly that constitutes. So just for example, I'm thinking that we're going to be reviewing the accounts in February, and that's a massive undertaking with a lot of words that aren't necessarily familiar to people with a non-financial background. So just in order to sort of make there be value in our role when we review that, I just wonder what level of training members get.
So you're correct. There are several specific. So there is specific audit and training, and there's also specific sort of budget training and budget scrutiny training and budget sort of finance, local government finance training as well. So we do a sort of few different things, but you're right. We can tailor them to different committees as needs be, and we will obviously GSA will have different aspects of training as they go through the year sessions, sort of prior to meetings and so forth. So we do that, yes.
Councillor Henry, online. Councillor Henry, you are muted.
Thank you. My question is, I've been a councillor for a while, and we have never been taught or update about what insurance councillors are covered under. As you may realise, things have changed, and the risk out on the street is very high, especially sometime when canvassing now. So what I want to know, are we covered by any insurance at all in case anything happens to us while we're out there canvassing?
Thank you, Councillor. That's a very good question. We'll certainly take that away and come back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson, and then Councillor McGrath.
Just Polly, just your question around, what is it that we kind of need at the start and asking candidates. I think for candidates it's quite hard, and you don't really know what you need to know until, yeah, exactly that. But I also just remember at the start you're sort of slightly death by PowerPoint at the beginning, and I think a lot more interactive sessions would be helpful. Sometimes those delivering it are not trainers, and actually there is something around being a professional trainer that's quite helpful. And I think actually practical examples, like we all know member inquiries, what are probably the most common casework examples, for example, particularly for new councillors, what are they, what are the responses, probably 100 other, well not 100, but 30 other councillors asking the same question at the same time. So hopefully the new member inquiries does also help. But I think there's, just more practical examples, and then revisiting as well, because a lot of things don't have context at the start and you can't kind of relate to them, whereas a month or a few months in, it might just be a bit more relatable.
Sharon, would you like to come in, or yeah? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. This will be obviously my first induction after the election with regard to training of our members. I've got many years of experience. I'm not saying I'm a professional trainer by any figment of the imagination, and we do part of the training package that we are looking into. And again, as Polly has said, this isn't exhaustive. This is generally what we look to give to cover all areas, but we're certainly open to suggestion. But leading on from Councillor Henry's question with regard to insurance and safety and canvassing, prior to induction and prior to you going out on the streets as councillors, which will be starting relatively soon, and you'll be fully involved, no doubt, we are going to do some councillor member safety, and we are going to talk about some of the risks. Safeguarding will come into that, what you may be presented with, what you may see. We've had reports of already and fairly recently the councillor having their hand bitten by a dog. So we will be covering as much as we can, and we will be giving advice. I say in many of my conversations with members, I'm not here solely to deal with conduct and behaviours. I'm here to support you and look after you, and that's something that we will be spending some time doing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath.
Yeah, thank you. This is a very helpful paper. I'm responsible in our group for looking at what we do after the election, so this is really helpful to have. Just a couple of things, one of which is just about the word mandatory. Now, I can see that there are some things which are mandatory. Clearly, the licensing and planning is mandatory. I think it's perfectly reasonable for the council to say before you can access its systems, you have to, or as part of that, you have to be trained. But it does seem to be used quite frequently. I'm not quite sure what the legal position is, but I just think we need to be careful about distinguishing those things we very strongly want councillors to do and those things we absolutely say they have to do to make sure that we're following the law or that the council systems are protected. So perhaps we could just look at that description. My other question is, are you considering what support might be needed were there to be a change of control?
Yes, with any sort of member induction programme, we will consider all of the potential outcomes of the election and what training would be needed in each of those outcomes. So yes, we are considering that, yes.
Thank you all. Councillor Sierra.
Thank you. I think this is brilliant because I'm the newest kid on the block, so I feel as if this is brilliant for myself. I just wanted to say, I suppose, two things. Is I'm NHS background, so in the NHS we have jargons that we're quite used to, and when we're having our conversations, our meeting, we presume everybody knows it. And I think I've come to the council and there's jargon that people blindly say and they presume that we know it. So I have to sort of sometimes say, sorry, I don't know. So I think it's quite important that maybe if there is sort of regular council jargon, that it is sort of like a vocabulary sort of thing, like, you know. And the other thing was, I was going to ask is maybe to have a what's the word I'm looking for, is be made aware what is our limitation, because obviously, you know, I suppose you come in and bring council, you think you're going to conquer the world and you're going to rescue residents, blah blah blah, but obviously we all have our limitations, and I think it's important for us to be made aware what we can and what we cannot do.
Thank you, councillor. Yeah, totally agree, and we'll certainly consider that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so can I? Oh, I was just going to quickly answer that
Okay,
point.
Ollie.
Just to say that I'm really glad that you said that, because I think that's a really important part of casework training, and it particularly when it comes to those cases where you would love to help residents but you can't, and I'm thinking of, you know, homelessness, for example. You know, I've encountered so many bits of member casework over the years where you have, you know, families living in very overcrowded situations, and the councillors are really desperate to help them, and actually, you know, we're so limited in what we can do for people, and I think it's really important for councillors to understand what, you know, what they can realistically achieve for people and what they can't. And I think, as well as the mechanisms of casework management, I think that's really important to understand as well. Sorry, Councillor Oliver, I know you've wanted to come in for a while.
Thank you all. Oh, Councillor Oliver.
Just one little follow up. We talked about, or the independent member mentioned that we're in the February meeting, we're going to be presented with the annual accounts, and we talked about there being training available for that. That's only a couple of months away, so is something already lined up?
Not specifically for this committee. I know there was some budget scrutiny training this week, and there has been some other budget training, certainly in the run up in terms of the council budget before full council at the end of February, but not anything specific to this committee. But there is budget training available.
Yeah, but just this is not about budget.
I ran the finance training last night, Tuesday, wasn't it? Yes, so been a long week. But if anybody's got any specific questions on the accounts, I'm more than happy to take them offline to increase their understanding, etc. And we'll have the opportunity to go through them at the February committee in any event. But I do recognise the complexity of these accounts and etc. So I am willing to provide some extra support if any member wishes to understand a particular nuance or a particular statement in the accounts, especially if it aids the understanding of that process, of those accounts, and the committee's responsibility for getting under the skin of them.
Thank you for that. I just wonder if we ought to do something a bit more structured. I mean, for example, there may be people in the room who don't really know what a balance sheet is.
I'll reflect on that and think about whether we can do some scrutiny introduction to the accounts. But they are highly complex, so I think we'll have to structure it in a fairly specific way, because there's no way we could go through all of the statements in reality in advance. But I'll certainly pick up something when I'll liaise with committee services on that.
Thank you. And Alexa?
Yes, I just on that point, I do think it is important. I mean, I'm not necessarily the best example because I am a qualified accountant, but there are, presumably you're getting another independent member. I did see that on the different thing. Okay. But if you do, let's say the process in terms of, let's say they were a lay person coming into the committee, the whole concept of like why SIPFA suggested to have an independent member is so that they can provide support that isn't political. They have continuity outside the political cycle. They're bringing that extra bit of, you know, someone who's not connected to the council, but able to then come and support the committee in its role. I think it should be set up in the process that that person is sort of like effectively inducted into the organisation and onto the committee in a way that makes them feel like, okay, at least I have an understanding of what my role is going to be on this committee, and in particular the importance of the accounts and what the audit opinion is. I'm not saying I don't need it, by the way, please, but if the process being there for someone else coming on, you know.
Thank you all. The committee was asked to note and discuss the content of the report, approve in principle the proposed induction program for elected members for May-June 2026. Agree the main member induction event will take place on the evening of Monday, 11th of May, and consider and discuss ways to increase member take-up for development activities. I will take that as a noted and agreed. Yes. Thank you. Item 11, appointed of the independent person. Sharon, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I will go through because just for members, I'm assuming you have read the report, but I was part, as with members in this room, part of the interview process for interviewing Faye hopefully I'll pronounce this correctly, McGillian. And we went through a fairly robust, I think, interview process where she was questioned. We had all members from all parties. It was a relatively, I wouldn't say a grilling, but we covered all areas. She did particularly well. And we have a recommendation here to make the appointment to Faye McGillian for a period of 3 years, and she would act as our independent person for the purposes that within the report, Chapter 7 of the Localism Act, and that deals with our standards and our conduct regime, assisting with that, but also coming along to this committee as well and being part of that. So the recommendations are to appoint her, and for that recommendation to go to full council, who will endorse that appointment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions on that? Okay, I will take the report as noted and agreed. Thank you. Item 12, work program. Any comments on that? Simon?
AI training or AI overview for the council?
So training isn't a work programme item, which is why it's not listed there, but we will be doing it before the meeting in February, is the current plan. There might be room to negotiate on whether or not there's value in having a joint session about the audit that the members are about to look at, and I'll talk with Roger about that later.
Any other comments? No? Thank you all. It was very productive, and now I will close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.